In 1981, a low-budget British film titled Chariots of Fire won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture of the Year. It told the story of 2 athletes competing in the 1924 Olympics in Paris. Harold Abrahams, a young Jewish man driven to win, and Eric Liddell, a quiet Scotsman who refused to run on Sunday. Both won gold medals and returned home as heroes. Today, Eric Liddell's unwavering conviction of refusing to run on Sunday at great personal loss has become legendary. He took a stand before the whole world and could not be moved. But the race for which he is most admired, his grand run through life, began and ended in China, far from the limelight and the cheering crowds. This is the story of a man who won far more than Olympic gold. He won the love and admiration of people wherever he went. In 1900, anti-foreign feeling in northern China erupted in a violent uprising known as the Boxer Rebellion. A secret Chinese society called the Boxers set out to destroy all foreign influence in China. They killed hundreds of Chinese Christians, along with foreign missionaries and business people. They burned houses, schools, and churches. It took troops from 8 nations to crush the uprising. In August 1900, Eric Liddell's older brother, Robert, was born in Shanghai during the Boxer Uprising. 18 months later, Eric Henry Liddell was born on January the 16th, 1902, in the city of Tientsin. Their parents were James and Mary Liddell of the London Missionary Society. 2 years later, their sister Jenny arrived. The Liddell children spent their early years together at the mission station at Shaozhong on the North China Plain. While their father took the gospel of Christ to the surrounding villages, Rob, Eric, and Jenny roamed the compound under the watchful eye of their Chinese armor. Every day brought new and exciting events at the school, the hospital, and the church. In winter, the children bundled up against the bitter cold. When summer came, the scorching heat sent the missionaries packing for their annual holiday at the sea. The wives and children often spent 3 months at Baie de He, with the men joining them for August. Eric was a shy, sensitive child who often requested the hymn "The 90 and 9" at family prayers. When the shepherd left his 99 sheep safely in the fold to search for the one lost lamb, little Eric's eyes would fill with tears, but most of the time his eyes twinkled with mischief. Eric was 5 years old when the Liddell family came back to Scotland on their first furlough. They exchanged the dusty North China Plain for the green hills of Drimmen, a village near the southern tip of Loch Lomond. It all seemed very strange and yet exciting, this place that the grown-ups called home. Eric and Rob attended a local school, made new friends, and met aunts and uncles and cousins everywhere they turned. As the summer of 1908 neared its end, the Liddell family faced the ever-present and ever-painful fact of missionary life: separation. Many foreign missionaries, living in rural areas, sent their children to boarding schools in the homeland for safety and education. In August, James and Mary Liddell enrolled their boys in the School for the Sons of Missionaries at Blackheath, just outside London. James Liddell returned alone to China, while Mary and Jenny stayed nearby for another year to help the boys get settled. They spent Christmas together and enjoyed a final summer before Mary Liddell faced the inevitable parting. Rob was 9 and Eric 7 when she told them goodbye and sailed with Jenny to rejoin her husband in China. Leaving her sons was Mary Liddell's greatest anguish. She missed them desperately and promised to write both Rob and Eric every week without fail. It would be 4.5 years before she saw her boys again. At Blackheath, Rob and Eric joined some 60 other boys, nearly all sons of foreign missionaries, in a nurturing yet somewhat austere environment that only boys could turn into fun. They settled into the routine of class, dorm life, and physical exercise, including 2 terms of rugby every year. And every week, a letter came to each of them from their mother. They spent the short vacations at school and returned to Scotland only for the long summer holidays. In 1912, the school left its cramped quarters at Blackheath and moved to Mottingham, where it became known as Eltham College. The boys welcomed the spacious new surroundings, including a playing field of their own for rugby and cricket.
Looking back now, I think that being at Eltham College had a very profound influence on me. I don't think that I was conscious of it at the time, very much. But looking back now, we were very lucky. The whole atmosphere was a wonderful atmosphere in which to grow up. It really was. When we got there in the morning, the first thing we did was we had morning prayers. We had that every morning. And with the whole school assembled, I don't remember us ever singing hymns, but we certainly had a Bible reading and a prayer. It was a very religious atmosphere, and yet there was an enormous amount of fun. We had an enormous amount of fun there. And they gave us a very good grounding.
Mathematics, geography, history, scripture, English, very fine chemistry master.
Mr. Burley was a born schoolmaster. He had a lot of sense of fun, and he did interesting and exciting experiments. Eric was really, very much like a lot of the others, a lively spark. He was in everything. If there was any bit of romping going on, Eric was there, always. And in his early days, he was just like any other boy. In no way outstanding or different at all from the other lively lads.
Early in 1914, the Liddells returned from China so that Mary could undergo surgery for gallstones. Rob and Eric enjoyed this reunion with their parents and their sister Jenny. And they also met 2-year-old Ernest, a new brother whom they had never seen. But before their parents could return to China a year later, the world was at war.
When the First War began, very, as far as I can remember, very early on, we were put on ration for most commodities in the way of foodstuffs, so that it affected us all. We had an ounce of butter, I think it was, a week, and things like that, you see.
Otherwise, I would say classes and everything was pretty normal, except for the lack of older boys. 18 and over were nearly all in the service.
With many of the older boys away at war, younger students like Rob and Eric became leaders on the athletic field.
He was a fast runner, and from the scrum, if he could get the ball back to one of the 3 quarterbacks, especially Eric, if he got the ball, he was on his way.
He played on the wing to his brother, and I think we began to notice that he was outstripping his brother for pace. And then, of course, I think it was the year after his brother left, he won the 100 yards race in the athletic sports in a time of 10 and 4/5 seconds, which at that time was a pretty remarkable time for a schoolboy. And then he was, of course, very much noted. But he didn't change his character.
The Liddell brothers made their mark in sports at Eltham College, particularly in rugby and cricket. In the annual running events, they often placed first and second.
Eric was undoubtedly overshadowed by Rob. If you asked Eric anything, you always said, ask Robert. Always you say, ask my brother.
Yeah, my father was Rob Liddell, who was the eldest in the family. And then there was his brother Eric, and then there was Jenny, and the youngest was Ernest. I understand, or I've been led to believe, that my father was perhaps more the dominant character when they were younger, simply perhaps because he was the eldest. And my uncle used to say, oh, we'll leave it to Rob. Rob will do it. I suppose my father did do it.
In 1918, Rob entered the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. 2 years later, Eric arrived to pursue a degree in pure science. During Eric's first year, a friend persuaded him to enter 2 races at the university's annual sports day. Against the university's best sprinter, Eric took first in the 100-yard dash and finished a very close second in the 220. A few weeks later, a Glasgow newspaper declared that Eric was certain to become a British champion and said he might even blossom into an Olympic hero. In the meantime, Rob and Eric played rugby for the university's first 15, until Rob had to give up sports for the sake of his medical studies. Eric went on to play for Scotland in 7 international matches. Eric faithfully attended Morningside Congregational Church and helped lead a young people's group there. But he was a quiet Christian, a young man of high principles who lived his faith but rarely spoke about it to others. The motto below the clock at Craiglockhart could have been his own: Virtute non verbis, by virtue, not by words. By 1923, Eric was a celebrity in Scotland. His name and photograph appeared regularly in the newspapers, and there was talk of his being selected for the Olympic team. But early that year, Eric faced a question that would change the course of his life, and it had nothing to do with the Olympics. It came in the form of a request from a dynamic young man named D.P. Thompson.
DP was conducting a mission just outside Edinburgh, and attendances at his meetings, particularly of the men and young men, was rather disappointing in DP's views. So he thought, what could he do to encourage men to come? He knew Rob Liddell, who was Eric's older brother, and Rob Liddell had been associated with DP in his work previously. And it occurred to DP that Eric Liddell might be the very man to draw young men to a meeting, because Eric Liddell at that time had already begun to make the tremendous reputation he had as an athlete. Rob, his older brother, said, I don't know, he's never done any speaking, although he's certainly interested and sympathetic to the work. DP left Armadale and went to Edinburgh, came to George Square, where Eric Liddell at that time was studying, and asked him if he'd come. And DP said, Eric looked down at the floor for a minute or two, and then looked up at him and said simply, yes, I will. So he went through to Armadale with DP and spoke that night at a fairly small meeting. But the following morning, the news was all over the press in Scotland that Eric Liddell, the famous student athlete, was one of the members of the team and would be speaking that night. And from then on, of course, as DP has anticipated and hoped, attendances multiplied, especially of young men on whom Eric Liddell had a great influence.
Eric Liddell was not a gifted public speaker, and he knew that better than anyone. He was by nature a very shy, private person. For him to come to Armadale, a coal mining town, and speak in the town hall to a group of men who had little interest in the Christian faith took a great deal of courage. For Eric, it was a life-changing experience. Years later, he told a group of people about D.P. Thompson asking him to speak about his faith in Christ. And Eric said, "I think the bravest thing I did in my life was to accept that invitation." Several months before the Paris Olympics, Eric learned that the heats for the 100-meter race would be held on a Sunday. He told the British Olympic Committee that he could not run on the Sabbath because he believed in keeping the Lord's Day for worship and rest. While many people admired Eric's stand, others were shocked that he would throw away a chance for an Olympic gold medal. Some even accused him of being unpatriotic.
I imagine Eric learned that the heats were to be on a Sunday in the autumn of 1923, and he would have made clear then that he was not going to compete in any of these events which were held on the Lord's Day.
He decided not to run months before the Games, and there is no evidence that he agonized over it at all.
Eric's refusal to run on Sunday was probably quite unusual given the amount of publicity, the sort of furore that it caused in many quarters. Eric not only refused to run on in the 100-meter heats, of course he also declined the possibility of running in the 4x100 and the 4x400 meter. And certainly if he had run in either of these or both these events, he would have won medals.
Since neither the Sunday heats nor Eric's mind could be changed, he agreed to compete in the 200 meters and also to train for the 400, a distance at which he was not considered an Olympic contender.
For a Scotsman, he's rather stereotyped in Chariots of Fire, and is made out as being some sort of rank amateur as compared with Abrahams, this well-honed professional. The truth wasn't really like that. Eric Liddell trained diligently. He went down 3 times a week to Powder Hall under the eye of a trainer, Tom McKercher, and there's no doubt that his style of training, although the quantity isn't the same as it has become, the style of training would be very similar to Harold Abrams.
In the midst of his athletic training and university classes, Eric continued to lead the young people's group at Morningside Congregational Church and to teach in a mission Sunday school. During the spring of 1924, he sailed to America and competed in the Pennsylvania University Relays. His companions aboard the SS Republic enjoyed his fun-loving spirit, especially at the Masquerade Ball. In May, Eric served as best man at Rob's wedding. During the next 6 weeks before the Olympics, Eric ran in 8 different track meets and completed a grueling schedule of final exams at Edinburgh University. In the 200-meter final, less than 1 second separated the 6 runners as they crossed the finish line. Eric placed 3rd, capturing a bronze medal for the British team. But very few people gave him a chance in the upcoming 400-meter event.
He wasn't favoured to win the 400 metres. He would have been considered very inexperienced at the event, and there was no indication in the preliminary heats that there was anything special coming. And when the final came, he took the final by storm.
They've cleared the last curve. Liddell is still leading. He's increasing his lead. Increasing and increasing. Oh, what
he created a record which was quite sensational. There was no way that anyone would have predicted the events of the final of the 400 metres, the day of the final, including the semi-final in Paris in 1924. But it was certainly a great surprise that he came through to win the 400 metres. There's no question about that.
All Scotland welcomed Eric home as a hero. At his university graduation, he received a standing ovation, and then his classmates carried him through the streets of Edinburgh. Luncheons and dinners followed in his honour. Eric Liddell, Olympic champion, national hero, was 22 years old. For the next year, Eric continued to run in amateur athletic contests, but his life had a different focus. He was headed for China as a missionary teacher. While he studied at the Congregational Theological College in Edinburgh, he joined D.P. Thompson in a series of evangelistic meetings throughout Britain. Eric was never known for his public speaking, but crowds came out to hear him wherever he went.
But people would flock to hear him. Now, I believe that when he was talking about religion, about Christianity, I believe that he was genuinely inspired. He was absolutely devoted to the Christian life. I mean, it took prominence over everything he did, and this lasted him right till when he went to China. But I believe he spoke on Christian matters with great eloquence and a lot of feeling. A lot of feeling. People respond, oh yes, people responded to it, yes, oh yes. He carried people away. And I don't think that was natural to him.
On June the 27th, 1925, Eric ran for the last time in Scotland. Before 15,000 fans at the Scottish Amateur Athletics Championships in Glasgow, he captured first place in the 100, 220 and 440-yard races. 2 days later, his friends and classmates pulled him in a carriage through the streets of Edinburgh to Waverley Station. There he boarded a train on his way to China.
Eric never set himself up to be a leader particularly, but he became so because of his sporting prowess, because of his fame. And people admired him at that time because he stood for a principle, and they admired that. And I think today people are still fascinated by a man who could do that, who could so effortlessly turn his back on the things that the rest of us admire so much, and you know, the material success, the fame that we all, well, maybe we don't all, but a lot of us do crave. We want to be known, we want to be admired, and he turned his back on all that. He had it. He turned his back on it. And also the principle of the Christian faith that he stood for. But it was the fact that his faith meant more to him than anything. And I think that people, even if they're not Christians, they admire that.
At the height of his athletic career, Eric could have written his own ticket in Scotland, in sports, education, business, or Christian work. The offers were endless, but he chose to return to the land of his birth as a missionary teacher in a school for Chinese boys. When Eric Liddell left for China in July 1925, he had no idea that his most challenging race lay just ahead. Nor did he know, at the age of 23, that his life was more than half gone. From London, it took Eric Liddell 14 days to reach China on the Trans-Siberian Railway. When he arrived in the summer of 1925, it appeared that his career as a missionary teacher might never begin. Thousands of Chinese students threatened to boycott the opening of schools as feelings against the British ran high.
I think you need to understand the tremendous power and position of the Western nations in an Asiatic nation like China.
Tientsin, a bustling city near the sea, teemed with 1.5 million people, including a large foreign population in the concessions, those areas of the city governed by other nations.
The British concession in Tientsin was one of the treaty ports, and it had been set up basically with the furtherance of British trade. And it was run just as though it was a British colony.
Run by the British, taxes by the British, police by the British, the government by the British. And one of the major things during the 19th century was not only to get China open to business, but to get it open to mission work.
And my grandfather had originally gone out to China as a missionary in 1884. My father was what was called a general merchant. He and his brother had worked for a man who had set up his own company. The missionaries were there to bring Christianity to what they considered the heathen Chinese. The business community was there fundamentally to further their businesses.
Now, the missionaries didn't make any money, but they had big houses, and they would, of course, as everybody did in China, have had Chinese servants. There was almost no one who didn't have 3 or 4 servants of various kinds.
Eric occupied the top room in the little home in the London Missionary Society compound in Tientsin. For his mother, it was a dream come true. After 2 decades of almost constant separation from her older sons, Eric was living at home, while Rob and his wife were in South China and could at least join them for a summer holiday. At the Anglo-Chinese College, Eric joined a staff of 5 British missionaries and 20 Chinese teachers. He set to work teaching chemistry and developing the college sports program. Dr. Lavington Hart, founder and principal of the Anglo-Chinese College, was a noted physicist, as well as a much-admired educator and missionary statesman. Since 1902, he had pursued the goal of educating the future leaders of China in a Christian environment where they could hear the gospel of Christ and see it in their teachers.
My father was Dr. Lavington Hart, and he felt that China desperately needed education, and particularly scientific education, but also this Christian basis as well.
It was my wish, even when I was a boy, of one day being admitted to this very well-known school with a very high standard of English language, sports, and above all, Christianity.
They had wonderful sports days. They had the pole vault, and of course they had the racing, and Eric Liddell was there to make sure that things went right. And Eric Liddell was not only a brilliant sportsman, but he had this strong standard, which I think was characteristic of a Christian man. Eric Liddell had got the ability to get on with people, and he was much admired. The Chinese thought he was wonderful.
He really is a very dedicated teacher. He loves the students, and he loves to spread the gospel to students.
My father, Augustus Pountney Cullen, had had the call to the mission field, and he went out in 1916 to the Anglo-Chinese College in Tientsin, where he spent the whole of his working life. My father taught English and history, and he used to talk to us pretty constantly about what a splendid person Eric was and how fortunate we were to have him.
Eric's days overflowed with an endless round of work and activity. In the morning, he taught science classes at the college, and in the afternoon supervised athletic teams. He served as Sunday school superintendent at the Union Church, where he also taught a class of boys. Eric rarely said no to any request for service. In 1926, Hugh and Agnes Mackenzie, along with their children, returned from furlough in Canada. Florence, their oldest daughter, was only 14 at the time, but within a couple of years she had caught the eye of Eric Liddell.
He was the superintendent of the Sunday school that she went to, and she was the piano player for the Sunday school. So they met at church, I guess you could say.
She used to go every Thursday and have piano lessons from Auntie Jenny, who was my father's sister. I guess that Daddy used to turn up every Thursday afternoon for tea, and it wasn't until afterwards that they realized that it was because Mother was there.
Eric was 27, and the girl he loved was 17. He was a missionary teacher, and she was still in high school. According to the custom of the day, what we called dating was impossible. But Eric was determined. He often took students from a Sunday school on an outing, and of course Florence was included. If he wanted to take her to Kiesling's restaurant for a German pastry, he invited her brothers and sisters to come along too. It cost him a little extra money, but he didn't seem to mind a bit.
And they went on picnics, the whole group, and Daddy was quite a leader. He was 9 years older than Mother, so she just adored him, but didn't think that that would ever, come to anything. So, but I think when he first really noticed her, what Mother told me was she was in a Sunday school play, and it had to involve some passion. And she got quite annoyed or something in it, and he said afterwards, "Florence, I didn't know you had that much fire," and he kind of liked that.
The annual summer gathering of missionary families at Beta Her provided the setting for their relationship to grow. During August of 1929, Eric and Florence saw a great deal of each other at picnics, tennis parties, and hikes to the nearby Lotus Hills. Eric became very adept at finding ways for them to be alone for late evening walks along the beach. And one surprising evening a few months later, Eric looked into her eyes and asked her to marry him.
She was very young. She must have been about 17, 18. And they kept it quiet to begin with, and he sent back to Scotland for a ring for her, which was 5 diamonds in a row. And then when the ring came back to China, they announced their engagement. And I remember Mother saying, gosh, she was such a kid, and there were all these other women in their 20s, some quite sophisticated, that would have been delighted to catch him.
I also remember him as Sunday school superintendent at Union Church, and he would pop in and out of the classes and, see that everything was going all right. Well, I remember the day when Eric and Florence announced their engagement. And I think Enid's class, my sister Enid's class, said, oh, now we understand why Eric was always coming in and borrowing pencils. Because he wanted to, it's quite a surprise to most people, I think, their engagement, because he kept it remarkably dark, I understand.
Florence was 18 when they announced their engagement in the summer of 1930. A month later, she left China for Toronto to enter a 3-year program of nurses training. Flo's father thought the world of Eric, but he was a practical man and insisted that she complete her training before she married. They knew the waiting would be long and difficult, but they hoped to see each other in a year during Eric's first furlough.
Well, Mother's very best friend, Betty Gale, and her husband were in Toronto at the time, and Daddy was waiting at their place for her to come from work, from nursing. And Auntie Betty said to me it was absolutely wonderful to see, because he was standing on the porch, and as she came down the street, he just swung off that porch, and the electricity was fantastic between them. She came racing down the street, and he went racing to her and just swept her up in his arms. And knowing they still had a couple more years apart before they could get married. But she said it was just pure joy to see them together.
They were married on March the 27th, 1934, at the Union Church in Tientsin. The Anglo-Chinese College closed for half a day, and hundreds of friends shared in the celebration. After the reception at the Mackenzie home, Eric and Flo escaped for a week in the beautiful Western Hills outside Peking.
Well, I think she brought great joy and completeness to him. She just sort of completed the picture for him, rounded it out. You know, he'd been a solitary person. I think they had a wonderful relationship, the two of them.
My mother's best friend, who I called Auntie Betty, always said that she had never known two people so in love as my parents. And that's pretty important.
In 1935, the London Missionary Society asked Eric if he would consider leaving his teaching post at the Anglo-Chinese College and moving into rural evangelism. He and Flo talked and prayed about the request, but decided that Eric should continue teaching. A year later, the request came again with even more insistence, and Eric agreed to go to Shaozhong for a trial period in July 1937. A few weeks before he and Flo and the children were scheduled to leave for Shaozhong, life turned upside down in China. The Japanese army mounted a full-scale invasion of the North China mainland. The cities of Tientsin and Peking fell quickly to the advancing forces of the rising sun. Soon the Japanese controlled the major cities and the railway lines of North China. Fighting between the Japanese, the Chinese Nationalist Army, the Communist forces, and the guerrilla units created chaos at every turn. After several attempts to reach Shaozhong failed, Eric and his brother Rob set out by canal boat. During the next 10 days, they were robbed by bandits and detained by various bands of guerrilla soldiers, before finally reaching Shaozhong on December the 8th, 1937. Early in 1938, Eric began his new work at the mission station where he had lived as a child.
And he was called acting superintendent, and with that title he could wear an armband, you see, with a red cross on it, and he would just shoot off on his bicycle and go anywhere and everywhere, all over the countryside. He was an evangelist to the villages. He didn't stay put. He was out all on the way most of the time. Very rarely was he staying with us in our houses, and he kept his wife Flo and babies in Tientsin, where they were safer, because it really was dangerous. We were constantly being shot at or locked up by the communists for identification. Extraordinarily fearless person, because he had this awareness of Jesus being with him all the time.
It's a very difficult job for him, but he came to the college occasionally. So when he visited the college, we young boys watched him. We met him, and we took him as a hero. Eric Liddell's name is synonymous with God's love. He has done so much He helps so much the people of China. He influenced a lot of people.
Eric's visits with Florence and the children in Tientsin were sporadic and often unannounced. One morning, when 2-year-old Heather crawled into her mother's bed and found Eric sleeping there, she said, "Who's this, the cook?" Eric roared with laughter and said, "I knew we were friendly with the cook, but I didn't know it had come to this." After 18 months of work at Shaozhong, the Liddell family left China in July 1939 for a year's furlough. They planned to spend 6 weeks in Canada and then travel to Britain, hoping for a time of family life together, free from the dangers and uncertainties of war. But it was not to be. In response to Hitler's invasion of Poland on September the 1st, Britain and France declared war on Germany. When a U-boat sank the British liner Athenia, causing hundreds of civilian casualties, Eric's plans were thrown into turmoil. He crossed the Atlantic alone, leaving Flo and the children with her family in Canada. But after 6 months, Flo decided that war or no war, she and the children would join him in Scotland. So they came, and for a time they enjoyed an island of peace in the sea of turmoil which had surrounded them for so long.
That was the summer of 1940, and we were at Carcant, which is in the Harriet Hills. It's my aunt and uncle's place. There were several little cabins there, and we had a wonderful time. There were sheep on the high hills, and there was a river that ran through, and they used to dam it up, and then we could swim in it. And we had great fun and great picnics. We used to have rabbit pie. I mean, things were rationed. Rabbit pie was lovely. But at Carcant, there were these wonderful rolling hills and then the stone walls, you know. And he would all of a sudden see a rabbit, and he'd say to Heather and I, "Stop." So we'd stop like this, and he would chase the rabbit along, and he caught it, and he went whoop like this, and it was dead. Well, we were horrified. He didn't do that again in front of us. No, he could catch a rabbit. Yeah.
Eric and his family returned to China in the autumn of 1940. He resumed his work in the country, but within 3 months, the Japanese ordered the missionaries to leave Shaozhong. Once again, Eric struggled with a critical decision: face the dangers in China together, or send Flo and the children to safety in Canada.
It was getting so uncertain in China. And she had 2 small children, expecting a third. And I know Mother said to me she was afraid, he was afraid that maybe we would be kidnapped or taken hostage, and then he would have to do things that he didn't want to do. And he could do his work better if he knew that we were safe in Canada and we would wait. But 2 years at the most. And he was so healthy and vibrant. You know, Mother, they expected to be apart. You know, this was something you did. You gave up those certain things.
In May 1941, Eric accompanied Florence, Patricia, and Heather to Kobe, Japan, to see them safely aboard the ship for home.
The last time I saw my father was we were sailing back to Canada on the Nita Maru. And I remember it was a lovely sunny day, and he took us down to, we inspected the whole ship, and then we went down to the cabin. And my mother was about 6 months pregnant with Maureen, and she wasn't feeling particularly well. So he sat Heather and I down beside Mum, and he said to me, he said, Patricia, I want you to look after your mother, and I want you to look after Heather and help with this new baby that's coming. And I want you to do this and promise me until I return.
And so, of course, I said, of course I will. And we all expected 2 years he would be back. Those words really stayed with me.
After Florence and the children left, Eric moved in with A.P. Cullen, his colleague at the Anglo-Chinese College.
So they shared a flat then, and they used to go, I think, every day, or most days, a long walk together when they would discuss things, and they would go out if they had any excuse at all, like a birthday in the family or something. They would go out and have a cup of tea in a cafe or something, because of course they hadn't got much money. All I know is that they were both in the same boat, with not having their wives and being anxious about their families.
In September 1941, Eric received the long-awaited word that his third daughter, Maureen, had been born in Toronto. He cabled back, "Wonderful news. Love, Eric." As the Japanese army gradually tightened the restrictions on the foreign residents in North China, Eric and his colleagues were kept from all contact with the Chinese people. With their missionary work of teaching and preaching curtailed, it was up to each person to find meaningful activity. For many weeks, Eric worked to complete a manual on Christian discipleship for Chinese believers. In it, he wrote, "Victory over all the circumstances of life comes not by might nor by power, but by a practical confidence in God, and by allowing His Spirit to dwell in our hearts and control our actions and emotions. Learn in the days of ease and comfort, so that when the days of hardship come, you will be fully prepared and equipped to meet them."
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Things changed dramatically as far as the Japanese were concerned on the 8th of December 1941, when in fact we woke up with a machine gun pointing at the front door and an entire Japanese army that was surrounding it.
For the next year, Eric and his fellow enemy nationals were free to move about the British concession in Tientsin, but could not leave the city. Early in 1943, the Japanese government announced that all enemy nationals in North China would be moved to civilian assembly centers, a polite name for prison camps. For Eric, the final chapter of his life would be written with 1,500 other people in a place called Weixian. In his manual on discipleship, Eric included this prayer: "Father, I pray that no circumstances, however bitter or however long drawn out, may cause me to break thy law, the law of love to thee and to my neighbor, that I may not become resentful, have hurt feelings, hate, or become embittered by life's experiences, but that in and through all I may see thy guiding hand and have a heart full of gratitude for thy daily mercy, daily love, daily power, and daily presence. Help me in the day when I need it most to remember that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. I can do all things through him that strengtheneth me. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling, and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy, to the only wise God our Saviour, be glory and majesty, dominion and power, both now and ever. Amen. When Eric Liddell and nearly 2,000 other people entered Weixian Camp in March 1943, uncertainty and fear were the order of the day. No one knew how the Japanese would treat them, how long they would be imprisoned, or who would win the war. But as time passed, anger and boredom and despair became greater enemies than fear. One of the internees penned these words titled, Wei Shen, the test. Whether a man's happiness depends on what he has or what he is, on outer circumstances or inner heart, on life's experiences, good and bad, or on what he makes out of the materials those experiences provide.
I was 9 when I went into camp, and it's quite interesting actually, because I can always recall being herded together in the old British Army barracks and being made to walk along the road to the station. And I was carrying 2 suitcases, my father was carrying 2 suitcases, and my mother was wheeling a pram with my young brother who was 18 months old.
It was in many ways frightening. We went down on the train not knowing what would be at the other end, having heard a great deal about what had happened in Asia in camps and so forth and so on. We didn't trust the Japanese one bit. We arrived there and were taken by trucks to the compound, knew nothing about it, and came in and noticed, needless to say, the barbed wire. We noticed the guns. I remember thinking, my God, I'm walking in here and I'm not going to be able to get out. Now, this had been a beautifully equipped mission compound built in the early part of the century. The buildings were in good shape, but there was nothing in them. All the pipes had been torn out, of course. The furnaces had been torn out. There was no running water. There was no heating. There was no nothing. The camp was a mess.
In the camp, there were no Chinese workers to do the hard labor, no servants to cook and clean. Bankers and missionaries had to stoke fires and pump water. Society ladies and prostitutes peeled vegetables together.
It was a strange bunch and made up of all kinds of people, all kinds of people. There were lots of floaters. I kept thinking all the movies I've seen of people in dirty white suits in Asiatic bars, they're all here. They were there.
And many people who had lived all their lives with comfort and privacy suddenly had neither.
In a dorm, the men and the women who were single men and women were put into large classrooms. And they had perhaps a foot and a half between beds. And there was a lot of tension over how much space there was, how much space your neighbor was taking.
When Eric entered Wei Shen camp, he had been separated from Florence and the girls for almost 2 years. Now communication was limited to 25-word letters sent through the Red Cross. In April 1943, he wrote to Florence, "Simple, hardy life under primitive conditions. Living with Josh and Bear in small room. Good fellowship, good games, teaching in school, food sufficient, boundless love."
Eric often talked about his family in Canada, and what was continually weighing heavily upon him was, of course, that he had never seen his youngest daughter. In open conversation with others around and so on, he would speak about his family, but speak in quite happy tones, and what a wonderful family he had and so on, and how they were getting on fine. But in those quiet times that we had together, one saw his concern and his anxiety showing through.
We went and we lived with my grandmother and grandfather Mackenzie, and we started school, Brown School in Toronto. And in the summertime, from about May to September, we lived at the island.
Mother was just totally there for us. She was always there. Before we went to bed, we always had a set of little songs, and she would play on the piano and we would sing. And the one I always liked the best was I Hear Thunder, I Hear Thunder. And we would pound our feet on the carpet, and she would be banging away in the background. We did a lot of singing. We sang when we did the dishes, and we always sang Grace.
In the evening, before we went to bed, we'd either read a story, we'd say our prayers, we'd talk about what the day had been, and anything that frightened us. We'd talk about Daddy and the war. We'd say, now, it's 6 o'clock here at night. It'll be 6 o'clock there in the morning. Now, the moon we see tonight, he will see tomorrow night, you know. And will he be saying his prayers for us now at night? We'll say our prayers for him. And so he was never far from us.
She said it never crossed her mind that he wouldn't come back because he was incredibly healthy when she saw him last, and full of energy, and she was sure that he would come back.
On March the 27th, 1944, Eric wrote to Florence, "You seem very near today. It is the 10th anniversary of our wedding. Happy, loving remembrances. We must celebrate it together next year." Eric taught science in the camp school, along with organizing sports and games. Many of the children and teenagers in Weishan were from the China Inland Mission School at Chifu, and Eric gave himself to them without reserve. Beyond his official duties, he tutored several students in science.
There were 3 of us, the same age, the same class, and he all wanting to do science. And so he taught us chemistry.
But we had no textbooks at all, so he wrote his own textbook from memory. And in the front he wrote, "The bones of inorganic chemistry. Can these dry bones live?" And then he wrote the laws, and he wrote the experiments. So he would say, you know, I'm putting this mixture into this and I'm heating it over a Bunsen burner. What will happen? And then I had to know the answer. So we did all the chemistry experiments without any equipment at all.
You couldn't buy a Christmas card, obviously, so you had to make your own. And he was ingenious, and he provided me with a fun Christmas card showing some chemical reaction taking place. And it was from him, and it was fun, and it made chemistry fun. He was a really good teacher, but he had a heart, he cared.
The people in Weishan organized concerts, lectures, and other special events for fun and encouragement. But for many of the teenagers in camp, it seemed that life had ended and their dreams were shattered.
I'd planned to go to college at 17, and instead of that I went to prison. and we had a prayer meeting in our class, you know, praying that we'd get out. But it was more of a gripe prayer meeting than anything else.
Well, I came into the camp at age 17 and left at age 20, and all my peers had left and were starting their careers in America and Britain and so on, and I felt that time was just marching past.
One of the members of staff, just as a joke, said, "Oh, the first 5 years are the worst." I thought, 5, 10, 15. My life's going to be over, because when you're a teenager, over 30 is the end. You know, there's no more to come, is there?
Well, the first thing he was doing was organizing us in sports activities and getting us all on the sports field to play. And he also had Bible classes that we were invited to, and that was always very inspiring. And he had a special burden for teenagers, and he was really concerned about teenagers, and especially those of us who were griping about why we were in prison instead of in college, you know.
I attended 2 series of meetings that he took in the church at the camp, and one was on St. Paul's Hymn of Love, 1 Corinthians 13, which he went through very slowly and carefully, and then on another occasion he took the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 to 7, and again he took us through it and applied it to everyday life in a very simple and effective way, and his personal life seemed to bear out everything he was saying in both these series of addresses he gave.
He just talked to us as if we were other adults, just naturally, and this made us feel very much at home with him.
At one point during those years, I came to the place where I said, Lord, I am willing to stay in this prison for the rest of my life if I can only know you. And at that point, I was free. It was as if the gates had been opened. I was released in my spirit.
And I went to God, really, to sort of consult him about this, and I became conscious, in a way I've never been since, that he was right there with me, and that the Japanese couldn't touch me unless he let them. And my earthly father couldn't help me, he was in free China, but my heavenly father was right there, and what's more, he'd put me there, and it was going to be the best place for me, and if I accepted it like that, I could enjoy it, and I proceeded to.
So it was a very uncertain and scary time in a way, although on the other hand, it didn't seem to stop us from having fun too.
Kari has been my friend for a very long time. We met each other when we were 7 years old, and she grew up with 3 brothers, and she found the discipline of a girls' school a little trying to start with. So she used to come out with words like, I will kick up the rumpus. I have a daughter as the Vikings, and we loved her.
Oh yes, I was very proud of being a Viking, a Norwegian. I didn't want any of the Brits to forget that I was a Viking, a Norwegian, not a Brit, you know.
As the war dragged on, Eric's brief letters to Florence were to reassure her, more than anything else, that he was alive and well. On October the 25th, 1944, Eric wrote to her, "Glorious weather. Winter activities begin. Good start. Teaching. Winter games. Children's evening clubs. Religious services. Kept busy. Remembering you all. Special love for special occasions. Eric." But everything was not well.
It was about that time that I began to take note of Eric and realize that he was slower in his movements. In conversation, there was much less repartee. He was beginning to think hard before he replied. And he was complaining, about December, he began to complain of very severe headaches. And that was the beginning of his major problem, which of course is a brain tumour.
The Salvation Army Band, where I played the trumpet in those days, the Salvation Army Band played outside twice a week, midweek and on a Sunday. Eric Liddell was in hospital and was obviously seriously ill.
And we came to the grounds outside the hospital, and we were playing some of the usual hymns with patients inside. And the nurse sent out a message on a piece of paper. Eric Liddell is dying. He would like you to play Finlandia, Be Still My Soul, the Lord is on thy side. Be still my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change he faithful will remain. Be still my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still my soul, the hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still my soul, when change and tears are past, all safe and blessed we shall meet at last. And we played it, and it was a matter of a few days later that Eric Liddell died.
I felt just desolate. I just felt, you know, why would God take him? And it just felt like the light had gone out of the whole camp.
Grown men who under other circumstances wouldn't be seen to be shedding a tear were in fact weeping openly.
I remember us as teenagers just talking, you know, why did God permit that, you know? Why would he go before he had a chance to get back to his family?
We missed him, we missed his example. We loved him. everyone felt a loyalty to him.
The coffin wasn't a very strong one because of our limited resources, so we had to carry it very carefully.
Just about 3 or 4 weeks before he died, he had given me his pair of running shoes, you see, and I wore them, I remember, and we carried the coffin out. It was a very lonely situation. They read the Beatitudes, and we lowered the coffin into the ground, and it was a desperately cold day at the end of February, I think it was, and I was just chilled right through, I remember. But the thing that was going through my mind all the time was, is this all that happens to such a great man? Is this all?
Eric died on February the 21st, 1945. But because of the war, it was the 1st of May before the news reached his family.
Well, I was 8 years old, and I came home from school, and my mother was crying, and Granny was crying, and I can't remember if Trish came home before me or after me, but I knew something terrible had happened, and they told me right away what it was.
Oh, and I think back for Mother, I think, gosh, that must have been, it must have just been the end for a while, you know, because how old was she? I was 10, she'd just be in her early 30s. And never in the world did she think he wasn't coming back.
Edinburgh Evening News came out the day we heard that he had died, and it was headlines in the paper. That really shook me. That really made me realize for the first time that he was quite a famous chap. And the memorial service, the Edinburgh one, absolutely packed the church. There wasn't a place to be had.
And of course the day came when the Americans released us in August 45, and I had rushed out with the crowds to meet them outside.
The American B-24 Liberator flew overhead, and all of a sudden people were just about hysterical. There were those who were crying, and it amazed me that American flags and British flags and so on appeared from nowhere.
The people in the camp had been listening and seeing us circle around, and they got pretty excited.
As it passed overhead, we saw emblazoned on its wings the insignia of the American Air Force. Instead of bombs coming out, 7 parachutes blossomed from the belly of the plane. And then we really went crazy.
We were all happy when we hit the ground, because when you jump from 400 to 500 feet, that doesn't give much time for that chute to open. They came dashing out, and there was a little Salvation Army band that came out and was playing Happy Days or Here Again or something to that effect.
Oh, tremendous, tremendous. We saw hope that things were going to end. The imprisonment was going to end. We were going to be reunited with our parents, and life could go on.
At the end of the war, when the soldiers started coming home, and we lived in downtown Toronto, so we used to go and see the soldiers marching, and their families would reunite there. And then when the parade broke up, this, you know, to me, beautiful young lady with a lovely hat and veil on threw herself into her husband's arms. And I remember very strongly thinking, gee, I hope Mom isn't looking at them, because she's going to feel so bad, and it's not fair. It's just not fair.
But she was wonderful the way she handled it. You know, we took that summer away at the beach, and then she bought the house, and we started again. I think the most important thing about my parents that I remember is their great sense of joy together. That's how I think of the two of them, with this great sense of joy in life and God and the world and people, and always expected the best of people and usually got it.
I remember Eric Liddell as a trim figure, wearing shorts, carrying buckets of water. Now, he didn't need 2 buckets of water, but he was carrying water for people who were old or who were sick or who were unable to carry themselves.
He was loving, accepting, and he would do anything if it really could help somebody.
He'd probably be standing in a queue for somebody else. He was, I know, for coal dust, which we had to make into coal balls for our fires in the winter.
It was his living out the Sermon on the Mount in his daily life that really has left a deep impression on me.
That he just loved God and loved serving him, loved people, and was delighted if he could do something useful. And if Eric Liddell was forgotten, that wouldn't worry him at all.
His speeches weren't the most important. The most important was his personal touch with people who were wounded. And many of them were the Chifu kids away from their parents.
I used to think, oh, Daddy, why aren't you here with us? Why don't you here with us? It wasn't until years later, that I met some people, children. There were children in the camp. And I realized what he had done for them.
We loved him.
He ran well. He ran well right up to his death. He ran well. Amazing. Yeah.
The hands on the old clock at Craig Lockhart no longer move. And perhaps there's a lesson in that. We say time flies, but some people say time stays and we go. We enter the starting blocks of life, not knowing the length of the race. Our life may be a sprint or a marathon. We're not told in advance. All that we can decide is how we will run. Joseph Featon has observed that every life shares a common mark, and he calls it the dash between the dates. On every tombstone, whether ornate or simple, they put one dash between the birth date and the death date. We get one dash through life. It reminds us of the stark truth. Just as man is destined to die once and after that to face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many people. In the end, men reduce all living to the cold mark on the stone. Those of us who live a life worthy of the Lord, following in the footsteps of Jesus, find the end of earth's dash to be the beginning of heaven's glory. Eric Liddell ran well, finished strong, and won a prize far beyond Olympic gold. You and I are still in the race.
The 1981 Oscar-winning film Chariots of Fire told the story of Scottish runner Eric Liddell and his victory in the 400-meter men's race at the 1924 Summer Olympics in Paris, and the story of his devout faith and refusal to run on Sunday, costing him a chance to compete in his best event, the 100-meter race. This rare display of integrity and personal sacrifice by a great champion continues to inspire many. After the Olympics, Eric Liddell ran a much greater race, true to his spirit and strength. In 1925, he sailed to serve in China as a missionary until his death in a Japanese prison camp in 1943. On this day of discovery, the three daughters of Eric Liddell returned to China for the first time since being sent to safety in 1941 to discover God's faithfulness to a faithful runner.
In 1941, the Japanese armies tightened their grip on North China as war raged in Europe. Missionary Eric Liddell and his colleagues had been forced to leave their post in rural Shaojiang and seek safety in the city of Tientsin. Even there, life was growing increasingly uncertain for everyone. Eric was deeply concerned for his wife Florence, his daughters 6-year-old Patricia and 4-year-old Heather, and there was a baby on the way.
It was getting so uncertain in China. And she had 2 small children, expecting a third. And I know Mother said to me she was afraid, he was afraid that maybe we would be kidnapped or taken hostage, and then he would have to do things that he didn't want to do. And he could do his work better if he knew that we were safe in Canada and we would wait. The last time I saw my father was we were sailing back to Canada on the Nita Maru, which was a Japanese ship. And my father insisted that we travel on a Japanese ship, that we would be the safest, and he was right. And we sailed to San Francisco. And I remember it was a lovely sunny day, and he took us down to, we inspected the whole ship, and then we went down to the cabin. And my mother was about 6 months pregnant with Maureen, and she wasn't feeling particularly well. So he sat Heather and I down beside Mum, and he said to me, I remember my part particularly because that was me. And he said, Patricia, I want you to look after your mother, and I want you to look after Heather, and help with this new baby that's coming. And I want you to do this and promise me until I return. And so, of course, I said, of course I will. And we all expected 2 years he would be back. And Heather said, okay, that's enough of that. Let's go explore the ship, because she has this wonderful free spirit. But of course, she was small too. And those words really stayed with me.
In May 2008, Day of Discovery invited Eric Liddell's 3 daughters to travel with them to China. For Patricia, Heather, and Maureen, this was their first return to China since their father sent them home with their mother to the safety of Canada in 1941. They settled in Toronto, and for nearly 4 years waited expectantly for their father's return, a return which never came. Eric Liddell's death in a Japanese internment camp at Weishen, just 6 months before its liberation, broke their hearts and left a hole in their lives that was never filled. On this journey back to China, the daughters of Eric Liddell would walk in their father's steps and discover a place their mother often spoke of across the lonely years. a place that would one day fill the emptiness in their hearts, a place where the family finally all came together, a place Florence Liddell described to her daughters as our magic circle.
These three are the little.
Where do we go?
She's the maid. She does.
When was the last time you saw Eric Liddell?
I think sometime in early 41, I think. He was very busy, going back and forth between Tianjin and Xiaochang. He had a hard job. He had to separate from his family sometimes, or most of the time. And he had a hard time. But he really is a very dedicated teacher. You know, he loves the students, and he loves to spread the gospel to students. He has the students full respect.
Li Ai, as he's known in China, is not an unfamiliar name, not just because of Chariots of Fire and what that brought, but the fact that he stayed on in China and served the people of China during a time when they were under oppression. The Japanese attack was so severe, and he cared for wounded. He risked his own life. Here was a Scotsman who was prepared to die to save the life of a Chinese farmer. That kind of practical expression of love touches people's hearts around the world, and in China, he is highly respected today.
What are you looking forward to on this trip to China?
I maybe want too much from this trip, because for me it feels like I'm completing some kind of circle. And because my father always seemed to belong to everybody else in the world, but not to me, I'm hoping to capture something of his essence here to take home with me and to heal a little spot I have in my heart.
I think what I'm really looking forward to is Wei Shen. I don't know if I'm looking forward to it, but it's something that I've wanted to do. As a child, we thought about exactly where my father was, and we used to think in the morning, it's nighttime for him, and the opposite way around. And when we'd say our prayers at night, we knew he'd be saying his prayers in the morning. And so now it'd be good just to be in that place. I know it won't be exactly the same, but it will be different, but it'll be the place. There's a great healing process going on. And I didn't realize how much pain that we children, and my mother must have had far more, had buried deep inside of us. You say, well, I'm going to be strong, and you go on and you try and forget. And when I first read some of the books, I could not, let's say, have you read the book yet? And because I wept and wept, and it's been a cleansing, a healing. And somehow I think, I think my mother and father would be just delighted. I can almost feel them smiling down and saying, good, good. Especially for Maureen. It's Mom would be just so pleased, so pleased. I'm sort of the old hand.
Because Maureen was sort of left out in the whole thing.
She was.
Tell me.
She was left out because when we were in Toronto, you see, that's when she was born. So she said, I haven't even been in China. But we explained very carefully to her that she was actually in China, but it was like she was in a taxi with the curtains drawn, because we used to have curtains. And she was quite happy with that when she was 3 and 4. But she was always looking for her father, always.
This is the site of the former Mackenzie Memorial Hospital in Tianjin, where Patricia and Heather were born. And Eric Liddell would have lived at the time, before he was married. The homes of the London Missionary Society were just on the other side of this building. Well, this area is directly behind the Mackenzie Memorial Hospital, and most likely this was where the homes of the London Missionary Society were. And of course it would not have been as filled in. The homes were separate, there was space between them. You'd have the Little family in one, the Longman family in another, the Cullen family in another. So the people who worked at the hospital were very close. And Eric and his colleagues at the Anglo-Chinese College really had a very short walk from where they were living to the place where they taught. And Eric lived here from about 1925 until probably 1929 or 30 with his parents and his younger brother and his sister Jenny until his parents went back to Scotland.
No, I don't.
I hope you got those heads back.
Yeah, did y'all throw your heads back?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
I didn't know if I had enough energy. Oh, dear.
Good run, ladies. I think Dad would have been proud of that one.
I never grieved for my father when he died, because I was 8 and I hadn't seen him since I was 4. And I remembered him, little baby memories of twinkling eyes and good memories, but it didn't impact on my daily life to find out he was dead. But I grieved for my mother, because she was my hero. And so anything that made her unhappy made me unhappy. So I did grieve for her. And if my father had known that he was going to die young, he could not have picked a better woman than my mother to raise us, because she had such a big heart for children, and she was so capable, and she could earn a living. She was a good business manager, and she gave us unconditional love while managing to be very firm at the same time. So she was hugely important in my life. And I used to say to my friends, well, you know, I didn't really need a dad because my mom is everything and I don't really need a dad. And then the movie Chariots of Fire came out, and I thought it was a wonderful movie, and it made my mother very happy, and she relived a lot of good things through that movie. But I felt remote from it. It didn't really involve me. And then when I was, well, in 1991, I got a letter from a lady who had been a nursery school teacher at Knox United Church in Toronto. And in 1940, when we were in Toronto on furlough, Mom and Dad put us in that nursery school, Trish and I. And my mother took us there every morning, and Daddy picked us up at night. And she wrote this letter about how she had never seen Eric Liddell run, but she would never forget his springy step coming down the street to pick up Patricia and I from school, and how he would stop at this big tree and we would see him coming and rush toward him, and just before we get there he'd go back on one heel and then come and scoop us up and throw us in the air. And she said I could see what a loving bond there was with his children. And that's when I grieved for my father and realized what a huge sacrifice he was from our lives, and how much immeasurably better and wonderful it would have been to have him with us. But over the years I've got many letters from people, some who were in the camp and some children of people who were in the camp, and they explained how important it was to them that my dad was there for them, and they were without their parents, and they so badly needed people like my father who were loving and kind and could take care of them and educate them during those bad years. And that makes me realize there was a purpose in it all. And today, being here, I'm hoping for a lot of healing, and I'm sure there will be.
Back to Bay to her. It's so good to see it again. It is just wonderful. I can feel and a sense when my mother was a young girl frolicking on these beaches and climbing the rocks and having picnics, and my father would be 10 years earlier doing the same thing. And then when my mother was 15, 16, and my father was 10 years older, and he had taken such a fancy to this wonderful, vibrant person, how he courted her by taking her to picnics with the rest of her brothers and sisters, and just a wonderful rest for them, away from the stresses and heat and hardships of their work.
My mother used to talk a lot about the magic circle of family, where the bonds were so strong and so deep that no separation and no absence could break them. But when my father died so suddenly and so unexpectedly, there was a great gaping hole torn in our lives. And we struggled very, very hard to fill that gap. We all longed so much to reconnect the magic circle, and many things happened over the years where we thought, we've done it, and the hole is healed. And then something would happen and we would feel the pain again, and we knew we hadn't quite achieved the job. So we didn't know what to do. But God, in His infinite love and wisdom, did know what we needed. And God provided so abundantly for David McCaslin and his marvelous crew to come to China, bring us to China, surrounded by love, held in God's hand every day, while we reenacted and retraced our parents' steps in a way that was so real and so much the way it really happened that they just sprung to life in our hearts once again, never to be forgotten. My parents experienced so much joy and happiness in China, and my father poured all of this love into China. And as we were retracing our parents' steps, that love just came pouring back to us day after day, more than we could even absorb from the Chinese people. They were so excited, and the love was just flowing, and it went directly into our hearts until we said, they're full, very full. And I personally feel like saying, hey Mom, hey Dad, no more hole. It really did the job. When people watch this video, I hope that what they see is that in the midst of war and terrible suffering and loss, that God always has a greater plan. And if they love God with all their heart and mind and soul, the way my parents did, and the way they taught us to do, that there will, in God's own time, as my mother used to say, Maureen, in God's time, which is very different than ours, in God's own time, there will be healing and redemption and the reconnection of the magic circle. Gratitude is a very silent and extremely powerful force that is greater than any darkness. My sisters and I are going back to Canada with so much gratitude in our hearts that I'm very excited to see what's going to happen next for all of us. And I can only say, thank you, God, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, God.
In the Japanese internment camp at Weishen, every Sunday afternoon, the Salvation Army band played hymns outside the hospital. On February the 18th, 1945, they received a request from Eric to play "Be Still, My Soul."